Hello everyone, welcome to this video on Frontier video. My name is Jay Wakefield. Now, if you live in the United Kingdom, you will know that this week is the week of the general election. And this is where we will actually go and vote for who we want to form the next government in Westminster. Now, a lot of you who actually follow my YouTube, those who follow my Twitter, those who, and those who are friends with me on Facebook, you will obviously know the absolute turmoil that has been happening in the past 5 years. And even before that. So this general election, well, it is really big. I think people are starting to see that there is a need for change. So I thought what I'd do is I'd kind of talk about some aspects of the general election, a wee bit about the main parties who are running, and kind of my thoughts on that, and I'm going to talk a bit about who I'm going to vote for, because, it is considered bad manners to ask people, who you're voting for, because it is a secret ballot. But, I'm quite happy to say who I'm voting for. Obviously, I can't exactly go into the polling station on, the day of the election and then just kind of shout, I'm voting for this party! Yeah, because they might see it as sabotage. Anyway, now, the last general election was held in 2010, and that marked the end of an era, actually. It marked the end of 13 years of so-called New Labour. In the UK, traditionally, there's been two main parties. You've had Labour, who have been the party of the working class, the working man, ordinary families, kind of help them get the most, what they need, things like, fair and equitable treatment at work, reasonable living wages, all that sort of thing. Then you had the Conservatives. They're obviously more about, if I'm going to try and put it in a positive way, then I'm going to say they were about self-reliance, about, trying to, keep as much money in the economy as possible. This isn't working, is it? I can't say anything good about the Tories. Right. But yeah, they were always about kind of saving money and, having people being as self-reliant as they can be. If you will, kind of an every person for themselves kind of mentality. But obviously, a lot of us will know that the Tories, well, yeah, we'll get to that. Now, in the 90s, we ended up with a party called New Labour. Now, it's obviously kind of the traditional Labour branding, I believe, with the rose and what have you. But this New Labour, for those of you who actually know about the Labour Party, who followed them, certainly those of us who've been around a wee bit longer, you might realise that Labour has been kind of moving away from the left since, basically the 60s. And it was, and then we ended up in the 90s with New Labour. who, wanted to still try and be compassionate, as far as I can tell. And yet they didn't want to appear as the party that would basically hand out benefits to those too lazy to work. So, obviously, they're going for... I think they tried to go for a middle-of-the-road approach, which kind of seemed fine. I mean, everyone kind of swallowed it. In 1997, New Labour actually won a landslide victory at the general election, and they formed the government, and they were pretty much in power from 97 through 2010. Tony Blair was the Prime Minister of the UK from 97 to 2007. He did a naughty thing in 2005. He actually ran on the ticket that he was not going to be resigning as Prime Minister of the UK, and then in 2007 he did. But while Labour were in power, obviously we all know, obviously when the Tories were in power, they were in power before that. They were in power from 1979 through 1997. Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister for the United Kingdom from 1979 to I believe it was 1992 when John Major took over. But obviously, in Margaret Thatcher's time, there was a hell of a lot of layoffs. She was very, very anti-trade union. I mean, okay, I can understand, people can get greedy. Trade unions can get greedy and ask for, a lot. And then there's got to be a cut-off point. But, I mean, Margaret Thatcher closed, a lot of the coal mines back in the day. A lot of old miners, a lot of former miners were laid off, and, a lot of mining villages are basically now just extremely derelict. I mean, I think it's, in a way, I think it's a good thing that we're no longer using coal, because, it's a very dirty fuel, really, and you end up with smog and all sorts, It's, and then your buildings become blackened, and, if your buildings become blackened, look at, imagine what it's doing to the inside of your lungs, you can. But, a lot of people were laid off, a lot of cuts were made. She sold off a lot of Britain's housing stock, the right to buy council houses, basically these, state houses that are, state property, like council houses, council flats, bedsits, what have you. These places that are cheap to rent because they're owned by the local authority. She decided that people should have the right to buy these places, and a lot of people took her up on that, and they're now letting them out. People are these places are now being privately let out, and they're being done so at a very, very expensive rate because it's private rent. Now, there was a lot of stuff that actually did go on during the 80s, during Margaret Thatcher's rule, a lot of which can be heard in punk records, actually, believe it or not. But then New Labour took over in 1997, and everyone was extremely excited. Even I caught some of the fever back in 97. I wasn't politically aware back in 1997. I just kind of liked the idea of Labour because they were, the winning, they were the team that were probably going to win. It was, for me, at that time, it was probably more like a great big football match, kind of like, yeah, Tony Blair's going to win. But obviously, as I grew up, I saw, a lot of the dirt that New Labour had gotten us into. So, for example, we had the petrol crisis in 2000. Because the petrol workers were going on strike. So that that was pretty disruptive. We had the foot and mouth crisis in 2001. I don't know if I'm right about this, but I always got the feeling that it was kind of mismanaged. And I think a lot of people might have had that feeling also, because an election was called in 2001. Normally elections are called in the UK every 5 years, but this was after 4 years. But the election was actually held in June because of the foot and mouth crisis, rather than in May. Which bit different, really. Then you have, in 2003, obviously Labour actually won again. But in 2003, Labour actually followed America, the Bush administration, into Iraq, and fed us all this tripe about Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction. Well, they didn't find anything, but I'll tell you where you will find weapons of mass destruction. In the UK! And in the US! Right. Brilliant. Okay, so a couple of nations with weapons of mass destruction are going there to tear apart a country because they're not allowed weapons of mass destruction. Or maybe they went because of oil. Actually, yes, that's right. They actually did go because of the oil. Don't believe that nonsense about WMDs. No. Also, while Labour were in power, they actually introduced tuition fees. In 1995, Jim Murphy, the Scottish Labour leader, he was the president of the National Union of Students, and he actually went against the NUS and went in support of tuition fees. Now, these are people who went to university for free. They could actually they were actually given far more than a lot of people can even borrow. And the student loans company, the language that they use, the way that they say things, it's like, your parents should be giving you this much amount a month. Oh, really? So you reckon that I could actually go to my parents and demand so many hundreds of pounds a month? Yeah, right, okay. That's going to happen, And I was always kind of taught to, respect my parents. So I'm not exactly going to go back and go demanding, hundreds of pounds off of them because the student loans company said that that's what they should be doing. They also deregulated the banks, did Labour, which actually meant that the bankers themselves could take much higher risks, which in turn caused the banking crisis. The government bailed out the banks, and the bankers were able to continue to receive their bonuses, which are, masses and masses of money, thousands if not millions. And, I just think that's totally disgusting, because what did the rest of us get? Oh yeah, that's right, we got austerity. And talking of austerity and cuts, Labour replaced the incapacity benefit with employment and support allowance. And along with that came the work capability assessment, and that was obviously awarded to a private contractor. Labour had obviously been playing about with the idea of privatising the NHS. I remember that from the early 2000s. So it's not just the Tories, it's Labour as well. Labour set into motion the change for the replacement for disability living allowance. They kind of started all that in motion, that disability living allowance needs to be replaced. And just before the last election, and this is something that really did rile me actually, they actually rushed through in the final days of Parliament before the election in 2010 the the Digital Economy Act, which basically, has provisions for a 3 strikes and you're out rule on the internet, downloading copyrighted material, all that stuff. Yeah, you know what? I didn't want that to happen. And nobody was, no normal person was asked at all. It was obviously a cozy love-in with the record producers who are greedy, and it's, and this is what we've got, and it's, I don't like that law, and, I just wish I could say, well, look, I didn't like this law, I wasn't asked about it, therefore, I'm not going to even observe that said law exists. I mean, yeah, if it had came to a referendum about it, that would have been fine. But obviously that would have cost money. It's easier just to kind of take the record producers' money and just kind of do everything for the rich. Anyway, I mean, Labour did do, a couple good things. I believe they kind of started the whole short start thing, kids, trust funds, that sort of thing. I think every child got an amount of money they could put in a trust fund. Can't remember though exactly the details of that. What I do remember though is Labour did actually bring to the table educational maintenance allowance, which on paper was supposed to help people from poorer backgrounds to be able to remain in education from 16 to 18 years old, so that, people who would otherwise have to go out and start earning, were able to actually, use this money and remain in college or in a school sixth form for further education. Now, a lot of people obviously weren't entitled because it's means tested. And it did annoy a lot of people because, there were people who, whose parents, I knew someone whose parents actually made quite a lot of money, but expected, that person to be able to support themselves through education. Which, I don't really know how you could have policed something like that. But obviously this person then had to work, which meant, that's less time spent on studying. So it really is a bit of a catch-22 situation. It really is a bit of a hornet's nest. But the Tories kind of simplified that by getting rid of EMA. Yeah, that's what they did. In England, at least. We still have it up here in Scotland. Another thing that Labour did, which I did not like, school kids in England now have to stay on till they're 18 years old. Now, I understand it keeps a lot of people off the streets and it looks better statistically. But I remember when I was at school. I remember, there was a lot of derpy people there, that used to cause me no end of problems. They didn't want to be there. The teachers didn't want them to be there. People who were trying to work didn't want them to be there. And I knew that once I turned 16, a lot of these people would leave. If they wanted to. And there was people who actually did leave and go into jobs. There are a fair amount of people who are really quite intelligent, very practical, brilliant problem-solving skills, but they're not very academic. I actually was, my parents actually fostered someone like that. He really struggled in his school, but, he could actually, he was actually brilliant at problem solving, and he was very good with his hands. But now, obviously, kids in English schools have to stay on until they're 18 years old, meaning that they've got to spend 2 extra years in a place where they don't want to be. The teachers have got to spend a few extra years teaching them, even though they don't necessarily want to. And, of course, the rest of the students kind of have to put up with them. It's a lose-lose situation. The only winners are the politicians because it looks better, in their statistics. It's like, oh yeah, there's We've had a significant fall in the number of 16-year-olds doing hee-haw. I think, I don't know what exactly they're going to do in these extra couple of years, but I mean, it was like, that was traditionally, for your A-levels or hires, advanced hires. So does that mean people who actually want to go to university and want to stand out are going to have to stay until they're 20 now? I just don't know. I've not properly looked into it. But then in 2010, we got the Tory government. Well, actually, what happened is, in 2010, Gordon Labour, which was at that time headed by Gordon Brown, actually won the election. Yeah, they did. Do you not remember? The thing is, though, they didn't actually win by an overall majority, so they would actually have to go into coalition. A coalition government, And this, for the first time, for the first time in a long time, gave the Liberal Democrats, which was then the third largest party in the UK, this was going to give them a wee look in. Now, I was quite excited because at that time I was a Liberal Democrat. And I thought that they could actually offer real change for the UK. I mean, there's a lot that, they've done in Scotland. So, the Lib Dems are actually approached by both Labour and the Conservatives to form a coalition government. They actually took the Tories up on their offer of a coalition government because they could, they thought the Tories might have, kind of more influence. Basically, what happened is Nick Clegg abandoned all of his principles, each and every one, like that, to jump into bed with the Tories. That really angered me, did that. And I'm sure it angered a lot of people, because here we are in a situation, we've got a coalition made up of the two parties that did not win the general election. How on earth did that happen? I don't know. But I remember finding out that the Tories had got in, and I knew that all hell was going to break loose. I just knew it. And I was right. No sooner had they got in, then, the rhetoric, I actually then started to hear all about their, rhetoric of deserving and undeserving power. I'd never heard that before then. I got to hear, the idea that some people deserve to be poor or deserve to be in destitution. It's quite sick. Pretty much almost immediately, they started persecuting people with disabilities. Now, a lot of people seem to disagree with me that people with disabilities have been hit the hardest by what the Tories have done, but they actually have. The Tories obviously brought in a lot of austerity measures of their own, which were a lot more harsh than Labour's. A lot of councils have had to cut things. They've been handed less money. The Tories actually brought in something called the spare room subsidy, which is actually better known as a bedroom tax. A colloquialism that was kind of coined by opponents of said subsidy. And basically what the spare room subsidy or bedroom tax is if you're renting a council property and you receive housing benefit, which is basically money given to you by the government to help you pay the rent. Now, if you have a room that you're not using, say for example, if I was in a one-bedroomed flat, or say, if a couple, say if I was in a two-bedroom flat, or you had a couple with one child and they were in a three-bedroom flat, the government would actually then reduce the amount of housing benefit payable to people in that situation so that they would actually have to contribute some of the cost. Now, I know some of you will probably be thinking, well, it's only fair that they contribute some of the cost. I mean, we work, we have to do it as well. Actually, there's a lot of people who claim housing benefit who work. And the reason that they're having to claim housing benefit is because, you know, they can't get a job that pays a decent living wage. But I'll come back to that. You know, you've got the... So, bedroom tax, you know, has actually hurt a heck of a lot of people. You have, you know, it's not just... It's not a case of, oh, if you're choosing to stay in that property that's too big for you, then we're going to charge you. No, people are actually being charged the spare room subsidy if, you know, even if they've been on the waiting list, you know, for a smaller property or been trying all they can to downsize. They're being punished for where they are, even if it wasn't their choice to be there. And once again, you know, people with disabilities who need an extra bedroom, maybe for medical equipment or, you know, maybe for a carer to stay over some nights of the week, they're being hit by it as well. You know, I mean, obviously the government says that, you know, reasonable, you know, obviously there's circumstances in which they can actually waive the spare room subsidy charge. But, you know, a lot of councils have just not bothered doing so. You know, a lot of councils, you know, they are, you know, coming down quite hard. And even Labour councils, you know, Labour are really kind of starting to show their true colours here, which are not very nice ones, because, you know, it's quite often been, you know, obviously there's been Tory councils, but a lot of Labour councils have actually turned around and said, look, we will evict people who can't pay the bedroom tax, who don't pay the bedroom tax. And a lot of people have been evicted, have been made homeless. You know, there's a massive rise in homelessness, and the Tories are trying to combat that by criminalising it. Certainly in Westminster, a soup kitchen was forced to close because apparently it was attracting homeless people who had caused a nuisance and what have you. The police in Westminster had been actually confiscating blankets and hot beverages that had been handed out to homeless people because they didn't want them to be there. You know, because apparently homeless people are a nuisance and we're supposed to forget about them, rather than kind of help support them into being able to get themselves a place. You know, and there's not enough smaller properties because, well, a lot of them will have been sold off with Margaret Thatcher's right to buy. You know, Margaret Thatcher did that, you know, oh, everyone should have the right to buy council homes. You know, and a lot of people actually took her up on that. You know, a lot of people bought their council houses outright. You know, these places that were formerly cheap to rent, a lot of them are now actually being let out by private landlords for private rent fees. And the current government are doing absolutely nothing to try and regulate private rents. You know, I mean, if you go for a mortgage... you know, your bank will decide whether you can really have a mortgage, and one of the things that they will look at is the fact that the mortgage repayments should not be any more than a third of what you earn. Now, in a lot of cases, if you rent a privately let flat, which you probably have to do because there's so few council houses out there, you actually then have to, you know, you're paying a lot more than a third of your income. Sometimes it can be quite often your entire income can be going on this privately let flat. And I find that really quite sickening. You know, and then, you know, some people are obviously entitled to housing benefit, but you're only entitled to housing benefit, you know, sometimes for a part of that rent. And recently the Tories actually blocked a move to make it illegal for landlords to evict people as an act of revenge. So, it's basically what we're seeing is, rich people are being deregulated, and it's more kind of sanctions and fake austerity for the rest of us. It's really, it really has been quite a big mess, and I've only just kind of scratched on the surface. I mean, for me personally, having multiple disabilities. In the last 5 years, people with disabilities have found, that their quality of life at work has dropped appallingly. Opportunities have dropped for people with disabilities, obviously because the government, the Tory government actually started out with the whole scroungers rhetoric. Apparently there's all these people actually who are just basically sat on their backsides doing nothing. Unable, that they're kind of claiming that they're unable to work, even though that they're perfectly capable of being able to work. And the UK Independence Party aren't doing any better, because they actually did release a statement saying 75% of people who claim disability benefits are actually able to work. Where did they get those figures from? And the actual fraud rate of disability benefits is 0.5%. Whereas tax dodging, that is in the billions, But the government are choosing to go after this tiny, tiny, tiny amount of benefit fraud. Now, I'm not saying that benefit fraud is okay, because it isn't. But, it's... If the government are going after that and letting these big businesses get off scot-free without paying any kind of tax, then they've just got the priorities wrong, and I'm not okay with that, because they're cutting for everyone, and they're justifying it by saying, oh yeah, people with disabilities are actually malingers, and they're actually putting it on, and they're scroungers, and they're lazy, work shy, feckless. I think it was Maria Miller who said it during the 2012 Olympics. There's two types of people with disabilities in this country at the moment. There's those going for gold at the Paralympics, and those work-shy shirkers fleecing off the state. Yeah, well, I don't actually find that very funny. Like I said, people who have disabilities who are trying to work, they've actually found it a lot more difficult. A lot of line managers are being less accepting of difficulties faced by people with disabilities, like illnesses, because of the scroungers rhetoric. They're facing a lot more discrimination by their fellow peers. When it's time to make stuff redundant, it's usually a person with disabilities who are actually being made redundant. Employers not necessarily getting the reasonable adjustments made for people with disabilities to be able to work. That is illegal, by the way, but because of the cut in legal aid, people with disabilities are not necessarily able to take their employers to court to sue over that, so basically the employers can get away with it because they know that they will have absolutely no recourse at all. And then, of course, you've got the millions of people with disabilities who are trying to get into work, and they can't. Because the applicant pools are so huge, there is really no reason for an employer to need to employ people with disabilities. In a lot of cases, the number of people with disabilities taken on by companies has actually went down the way. So, a lot of us are trying to get into work, but we can't because the government have made it so easy for us to be discriminated against. I mean, I had problems even before the Tories got in, so just imagine what it's like now. It's gotten worse. And as well, people who are job seeking, they're subject to a sanctions regime. A lot of job centres have actually played dirty tricks to make sure that the claimants get sanctioned. For example, if you have a job interview at the same time as a job centre appointment, you will get sanctioned whichever way, because you'll have to miss one to attend the other. They will, some job centres have been known to change appointments without letting the claimants know. Obviously, the claimants then miss the appointment because they didn't know they had one, and therefore have been sanctioned. And then there's a lot of people who have, and these sanctions usually mean that, their job-seeking benefits are withdrawn for, sometimes, usually, I think first it's like, a couple of weeks, then it goes on to like a month, and then 3 months, 15 weeks, and then all the way up to a year. Can you imagine that? But I mean, while you're being sanctioned, while you're getting no benefits, you still have to go sign on. You still have to be looking for work. Now we have workfare, welfare to work. Now, on theory, getting work experience to help you become employment ready, on paper that looks like a good thing, but the way it's being enforced, the job centre have not told people that they could back out. They basically threatened them, you'll be sanctioned if you try and do this. So people have been unwittingly actually going to work for these places like Tesco's and Poundland and, other places that actually do, took part in the workfare scheme. Believe it or not, one of them was actually the Salvation Army. So, yeah. A lot of people were actually, have been sanctioned on the work programme. A lot of people... And this is the thing. I mean, you work for your job seekers allowance, which is, what, about... I think it's £86... Hang on, no, it's £72 a week. Or if you're under 25, it's £56 a week. I mean, that's just no money at all, is it? And for that, a lot of people have actually been finding they've had to work literally full-time in these workfare placements. Full-time for £56 a week. That's slave labour. Not only that, they're still expected to be able to go look for jobs, go to interviews, drop in CVs in places. Where are they going to find the time to do this? Going into the job centre to use the computers to look for work, because, a lot of people still don't have access to the internet, and especially, people who are poor, who can't afford to eat, they can't exactly afford to get a computer and pay for an internet subscription. Things have just gotten a lot worse since the Tories came into power, and because there's so many people who have actually been sanctioned off of benefits, or, they've been declared fit to work when they are quite clearly not fit to work. A lot of people with disabilities have actually been declared fit to work after the work capability assessment, run by, well, previously it was Atos, but now it's Maximus, who are a big company in the USA, who are actually in big trouble over there. And have already been doing bad things here. I can't exactly remember what, but they've already been doing some pretty awful things here. But I've heard some horror stories about these work capability assessments. For example, there was a cancer sufferer who said that, if the assessor, touched her legs, it would really hurt her. What did the assessor do? Moved her legs. Yeah, and then this woman was in masses of pain. Some people have been told that they're fit to work because they were actually able to turn up for the appointment. Some people, I think it was, I can't remember where it was, I think it might have been in Staffordshire or somewhere like that. It was, kind of quite far south. Could have been even further south actually, but I can't remember. But there's been people who have, someone in a wheelchair turned up to their work capability assessment to find that it was on the first floor of the building. The first floor is actually, the first one up in the UK. The bottom floor is called the ground floor in the UK. The first floor is, the first floor above the ground floor. Just in case a lot of people in America are getting confused. Because it gets me confused, actually, in America when they do it the other way. Um, they've actually, these people found that the work capability assessment that they had to go to was up the stairs, but they weren't allowed to use the lifts because it could be seen as a fire hazard. A lot of people, now with the personal independence payment, that benefit is not designed to help people with disabilities. The government have actually admitted this. It's designed to save money. So, a lot of people who can claim, for example, the full amount in disability living allowance, because they can't get around, so they get the full mobility component. A lot of people then use that to put it towards a car to help them get around. And with a car, a lot of people find that they can actually go out and go to work and have some independence. But there's some of these people that due to the conditions of receiving PIP, they're not going to get any points for mobility. As in, they're not going to get any points that would entitle them to a mobility component, which means a lot of people could lose their mobility cars, and if they are in work, they will no longer be able to work because they can't get there, and then, the job centre will then come down hard on them because it'll be like, oh, well, you used to work, now you're saying you're not able to? Well, we think you are. And it's like, oh, well, I lost my car, so I can't actually work. And the job centre are the most unhelpful of people. They probably will go, why don't you catch a bus? So it's really, they've really kind of come down hard on people with disabilities. I mean, seriously. Because there's so many people who have actually been sanctioned, and there's those who've been wrongly declared fit to work, and therefore lost their employment support allowance, lost their disability allowance, things like that. Well, not necessarily disability living allowance, but, people might have lost out when applying for PIP, personal independence payment. Certainly employment support allowance. A lot of people have been wrongly declared fit to work, they've lost their employment support allowance, and the stress has killed quite a lot of people. Literally, there's been people have had heart attacks. There's been a lot of suicides. A lot of people have been committing suicide because, that they had no idea what was going to happen to them. Obviously frightened because they had no money. And a lot of people, their illness has just got so bad, and they succumb to it. There was an ex-army veteran who was diabetic. He was sanctioned by the job centre. Can't remember his name, but his sister wanted to make an impassioned... In fact, his sister made an impassioned speech at a hustings event. He was sanctioned by the job centre. He couldn't afford the electricity to keep his refrigerator on so that his insulin could remain cool. And he had literally no food. I mean, I think once they found him dead in his apartment, he had he had £3.44 to his name. They, I think, literally found a single tin of beans in the cupboard. And a post-mortem revealed that if he had anything in his stomach at all, it would have been a very tiny wee amount. He obviously succumbed to his diabetes and died. It was awful. But this government don't seem to care. And there's a lot of people who've died. The government are actually making them, they're actually hounding parents or the next of kin of people who've died, badgering them to come in for job centre appointments. Oh, you've missed this job centre appointment. There was a woman who was in a coma. She was actually hounded by the DWP going, why have you missed this appointment? Why have you missed this appointment? Why have you missed this appointment? And like I said, yeah, there's dead people who have actually been hounded. Imagine how bad that's going to be for a grieving relative. You've lost a loved one. Due to the effects of them having been sanctioned. Either, they've committed suicide or, they've had a heart attack, or they've had, they've actually died because they've not had enough food, because they've not had the money. And then the job centre are constantly ringing up going, why is this person not coming in for an appointment? Because they've passed on. That's insensitive. That is just pure evil. And kind of knowing all this stuff. And here's something else I want to go on to, actually, that, I realised I'd not talked about, the last thing. But something else I need to talk about as well. Food banks. Food banks. A lot of people are actually... a lot of people are now in receipt of support from food banks, as in getting food packages, because of the number of people being sanctioned and unable to make ends meet. There's been masses of food banks. It was announced recently that nearly 1 million people have used food banks. Now, there's a statistic David Cameron didn't want to have shown before the election. The DWP. They've been trying to hide for ages the number of people who've died as a result of the cuts to disability benefits. They've really been doing their best to hide it. And, they've been trying to deny that people have died because of the cuts. But I think Vox Political have actually now won a court case. The DWP will have to actually then reveal how many people have died. There's people who've actually tried to ring up and find this information under a Freedom of Information request. But the government can turn down a Freedom of Information request if they believe it to be vexatious. As in, they believe that you only want the information to actually, to hurt people with it. But every FOI request for the numbers of people who have been killed as a result of these benefit reforms, the DWP have been trying to keep it secret, and nobody's been able to get it out of them until now. I don't have the figures, but I'll no doubt keep you updated, probably buried somewhere in another YouTube video about working on a laptop or something. So, the Tories, obviously they've done all that. But there's other things they've done. They're wanting to renew Trident. They're wanting to go to war with Syria. They seem to want to be stirring things up with Russia. And, talking of terrorism, they brought in the Retention and Investigatory Powers Act, which basically means now the government can have access to information about your phone calls and emails. Now, they say it's not the content of the call itself. They say it's just kind of metadata about it. Now, luckily I understand database speak, so data about data. Brilliant. Yeah, that's really good, guys. Yep, I remember your 2003 manifesto political announcement on BBC Two when I was taping The Simpsons about how there's now more bureaucrats and beds and, we need to cut down on this. So you're actually adding more? Ah, brilliant. Excellent. So, let's say I place a phone call. The government can now access, I think that they can actually keep information about, when I made the call, to whom I made the call, how long the call was going, where I was when I made the call, and things like that. They say that they don't keep the information in, they say that they don't keep information about, discussions during the call, or the call itself. I call BS. You know that they're keeping that sort of information. You just do. So basically, we can't even say what we think now because, they brought in new laws after the 2011 riots. So, even if you're seen to be, someone on Facebook got 180 days in jail because they'd been seen to be inciting a riot. So even if you say something in anger, now, they'll get you jailed. It's, one of the signs of a fascist state. Their obsession with law and order, crime and punishment. And the Tories seem to love to do that. Well, of course they will, because, there's private prisons, and people can get thrown into these private prisons after a verdict handed down by a secret court. Now, let's just imagine this for a second. A secret court, okay? You could be just kind of sat here. It's Monday evening. It's May Day bank holiday. You know, you're just sitting down to maybe watch some bank holiday television. You know, you've had your tea. You've got a cup of tea. What you don't realise is, somewhere in a secret location, someone could actually be deciding your fate. You're being tried of a crime you had no idea about, and you've been found guilty, and the first that you are going to know about it is when the police show up to take you to the jail. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen for everyone. In fact, it'd be pretty paranoid to think that it would. But considering what the government thinks of as a crime, you know, and what they will do to try and silence people these days, you know, it really wouldn't be surprising, you know, if a few of the more politically active people actually did get thrown into jail. You know, obviously they've used the old chestnut of counteracting terrorism, but, you know, I actually think the real terrorists are the ones in power. You know, it's at the end of the day, they do a hell of a lot of damage. You know, they do as much, if not more damage, than any well-known terrorist organisation, and a few of the unknown ones as well. You know, it's, really quite sickening. But, I mean, these secret courts, you have no right to defend yourself. Because that's living in a free society, isn't it? Oh, democratic. So, talking of democracy, where does this leave me? Who am I going to vote for? Am I going to vote for Labour, the so-called Red Tories? Am I going to vote for the Liberal Democrats that sold us out? Or am I going to go and vote for the Blue Tories, the actual Tories, who basically want Britain's people with disabilities dead, who have actually been persecuting us so well that it could actually have came straight out of a history lesson that I took when I was 12, outlining the causes of World War II. No, I'll tell you exactly who I'm going to vote for. None of that shower. I'm actually voting for a party that people south of the border tend to treat with disdain. I'm talking, of course, about the Scottish National Party. That's what they're called. They're not called the Scottish Nationalist Party. They're called the Scottish National Party. Now, we've actually had them in Holyrood, which is our government, for a number of years now, and they've done quite a lot. They've absorbed a lot of the bedroom tax. They've done what they can to keep prescriptions free university education, spending our money in a good way to benefit the will of the people. Now, so a lot of you will know that we had a referendum back in September last year. That went well. It's pretty obvious if you look at the facts of everything that went on, the sampling of postal votes, the fire alarm going off in Dundee, the bin bags of ballot papers found, the fact that the UN offered to kind of witness the referendum, but the UK didn't want them to. That referendum was rigged. You know? The UK has been feeding lies, saying, oh, Scotland is heavily subsidised by Westminster. Actually, we pay more in tax per head than they do south of the border. So actually, we subsidise Westminster. You know, they were ringing up Labour people. This is Labour, apparently the party of the working people. You know, ringing up old age pensioners going, you do realise if you go independent you're going to lose your pension, even knowing that if you go anywhere in the world, you're still entitled to receive your UK pension. A lot of people retire to Spain and yet still get their pension. So I don't see how an independent Scotland would be any different. They were telling us that there was no oil. They were trying to keep it under wraps at a new oil field had been found west of, I believe it was Shetland. And they were calling, they were insulting people. They were saying, "Oh, Scotland's full of benefit scroungers. You're never going to be able to cope on your own independently." Oh yeah, of course we're not. It's not like we export anything, is it? I mean, it's not like it's not like Scotland has ever even so much as made a video game with a cult following. I mean, can you imagine if Scotland made a video game for the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360? Let's imagine that it was the 5th iteration of the main game. It came out in 2013 for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, then saw a release in 2014 to the Xbox One and PS4. And then PC gamers like, for example, I don't know, myself, we've been... Can you imagine if we're wanting this game, but we're made to wait, and then finally, we get word that it's coming out in PC. It's supposed to, we're told it's supposed to come out by the end of 2014. No, it's been pushed back to the beginning of 2015. No, it's been pushed back to February. No, it's been pushed back to March. No, it's been pushed back to April. And finally, on April, we get this game. And masses of people pre-order it and get loads of in-game credit. And now people are playing the game online with all their friends. It's not like Scotland could ever do anything like that. Oh, wait! Now I know what that game is. It's Grand Theft Auto 5 by Rockstar North, who are formerly known as the MA Design of Dundee. Which, the last time I checked, that was in Scotland. But now they're based in Edinburgh, which is also in Scotland. Yeah, no, we can do anything like that. No, we're just dumb. We have no idea. We don't export any water, we don't export any oil, we don't export any food. Oh wait, yes we do. Yes, we do. We could actually manage on our own as an independent nation. We could actually put money back into the economy. Imagine an entrepreneur has a brilliant idea for something, but needs a university education to make it work. And this could make Scotland billions. Well, in England, they're going to have to pay for their education. But they come from a poor background. Oh no! If they're living in Scotland, they can get that education for free. We could have... it could be a Scottish university that can actually find the best way to store hydrogen cells, hydrogen fuel. It could be... you never know. Some of these ideas could come from the poorest of people. But, because the Tories have actually tripled tuition fees to £9,000, the Liberal Democrats, that made most of their manifesto, by the way, in 2010. Oh, we're going to abolish student tuition fees. Nope. As soon as they got into bed with the Tories, they sold every one of their principles, tuition fees being one of them. At times I completely forget, actually, that the Lib Dems are in power, with the Tories, because it's all just Tory. It's completely gone right-wing. And one thing that scares me is that a lot of the electorate in England are actually wanting now to vote the extreme right party UKIP, who are wanting us out of Europe. The Conservatives, they want to abolish the Human Rights Act. That should tell you everything you need to know. You will have no human... they're wanting a Bill of Rights, like, in America. Because, of course, that works so well, doesn't it? They're bringing in Republicans, American Republicans, to try and convince people to vote Conservative. Republicans are nutters. They're absolute idiots. I'm sorry. I know that there's some people who vote Republican who are good people, but I mean, you get people, you get these extremists who don't like healthcare that's nationalised, that think, that, are perfectly happy to be as discriminatory as possible. They're wanting to start fracking, hydraulic fracturing. It's well known that hydraulic fracturing carries a lot of risks, things exploding, that sort of thing. But no, they're wanting to do that. It's going to completely interfere with our water table. And guess what? It's Scotland that seems to be one of the biggest places that they've kind of earmarked for fracking. And the Conservative government talking about toxic waste, they've recently actually brought in, very quietly, a new law that actually means that people have to actually take toxic waste in their local parks and places like that. Nuclear toxic waste. Brilliant. Thanks, lads. You really know how to take care of your people. Now, the SNP, they actually put a moratorium on fracking in Scotland. It's not been banned outright, but at least it's on hold until they actually, are able to put together some information about fracking. Obviously, there's a lot of people down in England who are saying fracking is perfectly safe, you can lift your moratorium now. No, that is completely wrong, because there's been places in America, fracking wells have actually exploded. People in areas affected by fracking have been falling ill, due to the water. The water being ruined. You can actually set fire to your water in areas where there's fracking. Yeah, seriously. You can set fire to your water. Do you know how messed up that is? And, I think a lot of people think that just because I would like a referendum, actually, they think, oh, Jay, you obviously must hate the UK. No, I don't hate people from the UK. I just hate the government. I really don't like it at all. I think Scotland is going to be in a better position. And, as an independent country, we will still obviously be friends with our neighbours in the rest of the UK. And they'll get to, they might actually get to like us a wee bit more, because obviously they've been told all of this absolute nonsense that they're actually subsidising us. So they might be a wee bit more friendly with us, knowing that their precious money is not actually being spent on us. Well, not only that, we'll be able to show that we can actually live as a progressive society. Scotland have always been very friendly with the world. The Great Scottish French Alliance. I was chatting to my neighbour about it. The Scots and the French, we traditionally like each other. It's the English that don't very much like the French. No, I'm not saying every English person doesn't like every French person and vice versa, but there's always been that kind of rift between England and France. But where Scotland and France have always really traditionally gotten along. Probably because we're all a bunch of Celtic nations. It's we get on with Ireland and Wales as well. We also get on very well with the Scandinavian countries. I reckon that as an independent country, we would be better prepared to make friends with the world, to actually trade with the world. Because we're not actually part of the, as an independent country, we would not be part of the UK, we would not be obliged to follow America into war against countries that don't deserve it. War does not solve anything. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. Okay, World War II, let me think. So Hitler is gone. That's good. That's fantastic. I'm really glad about that. But it gave rise to the Cold War. That gave rise, to the Vietnam War. There was, in the 80s, people thought they were actually going to be nuked. And now there's been all sorts of little proxy wars. And obviously... And it wouldn't surprise me if what happened in World War II hasn't had a part to play in the current rift between the West and the East, which I just don't get it. Just because there's some dictator, do we suddenly just because there's some dictators in Middle Eastern countries, do we suddenly now have to hate everyone from the Middle East? I don't think so, and that's not what I'm going to do. I'm just sick of people saying, oh, we got to hate these people, you know. So, I mean, as an independent country, I reckon Scotland is poised to be able to make friends with everyone. You know, we could imagine that we could be friends with both the East and the West, you know. And the SNP has been one of the better political movements in our times, you know, one of the best. Very progressive. And, you know, Nicola Sturgeon, I mean, you watch her on the television, she is absolutely amazing. You know, the other politicians are bumbling about like the three flaming stooges, and she's there, she's got it together. She opens her mouth, you just know that you're going to be okay. The SNP, very approachable. I had to email my local representatives, if you will, last year. You know, 2 MPs and an MSP. My 2 MPs are Labour. My MSP is a guy from the Scottish National Party called Kevin Stewart. Everyone knows him. You know him? Yeah, you probably do. Everyone does. And that's the thing about the SNP and, you know, MSPs, is that you know these people. These are people you see. These are people who are in your community. These aren't people who are getting driven around in Jaguar XJs followed by an armed guard. No, these are people that you probably might just bump into on the way to the shops. They're like, you alright, Kevin? Aye, no bad. I'm on my way to pick up a copy of the National. Aye, yeah, that sort of thing, you know? I met my local SNP candidate last Monday, and this time last week, I felt like I was meeting a celebrity. Kirsty Blackman. She is amazing. Seriously, I mean, she is one of the friendliest people you would ever hope to meet. Now that is the person who I want to send down to Westminster to represent me, because I've actually spoken to her face to face. The SNP are a very friendly bunch. You know, Kevin, when I emailed my MPs and MSP last year, Kevin was the only one who actually replied. I believe I got a formal email from one of the Labour MPs, but Kevin was actually the person who replied and who actually did stuff. Okay, just made a couple of phone calls, but still, you know, that's a lot more than a lot of politicians would do. So it's like, you know, with the SNP, I know that these people are serving my interests, the same as they're serving my neighbours' interests, the same as they're serving the interests of people who I work with. You know, so I am planning to vote SNP in this election. No doubt about it. In fact, I'm a member of the SNP. And, you know, I was chatting to Kevin the other night on Facebook. And I was talking about disability, and he's actually offered to meet up with me and someone else after the election, buy us both a coffee, and talk about what we're going to do, you know, a disability strategy. Now that is fantastic. I could probably go on now and chat to Kevin. This is how brilliant, you know, this is what you want. You want a representative to be approachable. Now, I don't feel that any of the main parties, Labour, Liberal Democrat, Conservative, I don't believe that they are approachable. Also, they're actually, you know, the Westminster parties are all pro-austerity. So, if you vote Labour, if you vote Lib Dem, if you vote Conservative, you're just going to be getting more cuts, which is going to mean more misery for regular everyday people, while the people at the top get richer. I'm not going to do that, and I recommend that you don't either. There's alternative parties to vote for. Now, I know some of these parties are small potatoes, but if enough people vote for them, they can become big potatoes. I mean, look at how the SNP has grown since the referendum. You know, we're one of the biggest forces now. You know, it's pretty amazing. You know, it's a movement that just suddenly grew exponentially since the referendum. And, you know, I think if you're in Scotland, I think this year it's a good idea to vote SNP. If you're in Wales, I think it's Plaid Cymru. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. vote for them. You know, they're pretty good. And if you do live in England, whatever was the matter with the Green Party? Now, I know there's a lot of people around here that are like, yeah. I mean, I understand, you know, Nicola Sturgeon's good, but what I really want is to vote Green. Unfortunately, at the moment, the Greens aren't necessarily going to get us anywhere. But think, we will become independent. I just know we will. You know, we've had too much at the hands of Westminster. They're insulting us now. You know, they're saying, oh, if SNP get in, we're not prepared to do a government with them. They're not prepared to listen to the will of the Scottish electorate. Yeah, that's really democracy, guys. Yeah, that's how it works. Not. It's... And, you know, they've really started to actually insult Scotland as a nation. You know, prominent people as well as people in power. You know, and they're really going very, you know, kind of very sexist abuse towards our First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, you know. So I think people in Scotland are starting to wake up. We realise that there's no place for us in, you know, I think there is no place for us to be in the UK anymore. You know, it's time for us to leave, I think. But we're only really going to be able to do that if we return 59 SNP MPs to Westminster. You know, and then for those of you who wanted to vote Green, once we're independent, you never know. We might actually be able to do that. You might be able to do that. You know, if you want to continue voting SNP, I probably will, after we become free, then do so. If you wish to vote Green, do so. If you wish to vote Scottish Socialist Party, do so. You know, or if you wish to vote any of the other three idiots, then you can do that as well. But, I mean, seriously, this election is a big one. So make sure you do at least some research before you vote. If you're watching this video, you may have access to the internet. So I would recommend using that internet connection. Go on to the different websites of the parties, but also read around their websites. Don't just kind of take what's on their websites as gospel, because it isn't. Everyone lies. Even, you know, I can imagine even the SNP won't have everything on their website, so you've got to kind of read around. But be careful, because a lot of the mainstream media are actually biased against the SNP, so you actually have to go and look at social media outlets. Look at Bella Caledonia, look at Wings Over Scotland, Vox Political, The National. You know, look at things like that. You know, and then once you've read enough, and once you feel that you've made up your mind, but only after you think that you've actually researched enough, then go and cast your vote. Because, you know, the mainstream media are not going to help you out. We only have one paper who's pro-independence in Scotland, and that is The National. Brilliant paper, very well written. So if you're in Scotland, pick up a copy of The National tomorrow. You know, when you go for your paper and you meet your MSP there, go and pick up a copy of The National. A lot of us have been actually working, well, not necessarily me personally, but a lot of people have been working tirelessly to get their local shops and their supermarkets to carry The National. A lot have said they won't, you know, and then people have went and boycotted them. But a lot have actually now undertaken to buy in The National. You know, it's a brilliant paper. If you can't actually buy a physical copy, or you have difficulty reading it, you can actually buy it online. You can actually buy it as a PDF, which you can then, you know, if you have something like a tablet, you can even kind of load it onto that, so you can kind of carry it with you through the day like you would a regular paper. Anyway, I think I've rambled on for long enough now. I hope this video has taught you something. I hope I've not offended too many people in this video. If you did enjoy this video and would like to see more, I do other things. I do computer stuff as well. I like doing computer stuff on YouTube. But if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to subscribe to my channel, and please feel free to like it on Facebook. Thank you for watching, everyone, and I hope you'll all join me for my next video.